Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins not with a scream, but with a toast. A gathering of friends. A silver cup passed from hand to hand, and by morning, one of them was dead. The police called it poison. But Hercule Poirot saw something far more unsettling. A dinner filled with unspoken tension, glances that lingered too long, and a silence that spoke louder than any confession. In a world of high society, words can deceive, but silence? Silence can kill. Stay with us till the end. And if you enjoy stories where every quiet moment hides a secret, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Tea That Stopped the Heart. The rain came gently that morning, not with fury, but with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Outside the tall windows of the Langford manor, the sky was the color of ash, and the gardens trembled beneath the drizzle. Inside, the fire burned low, its crackle the only sound until the maid, Alice, entered with a silver tray of tea. She placed it on the mahogany table between two women. One was Lady Margaret Langford, widow of the late Sir Robert Langford, once a respected judge. The other was Evelyn Drake, a young journalist who had come to write a piece on the Langford family's vast art collection. They sat in a silence so still it might have been cut from stone. Lady Margaret lifted her teacup, fingers trembling slightly. Her gaze was distant, as if watching something no one else could see. She smiled at Evelyn, though the expression never reached her eyes. "You must forgive the quiet," she said softly. "This house hasn't had laughter in a very long time." Evelyn smiled politely. "That's quite all right, Lady Langford. Silence can be comforting, or it can be deafening," Margaret replied. Moments later, she raised her cup again, took a delicate sip, and froze. Her body stiffened. The cup fell from her hand, shattering against the carpet. Alice screamed. Evelyn stood up, startled, watching as Lady Margaret collapsed forward, her head striking the table's edge with a dull thud. The teacup rolled, spilling the last of its golden liquid in a silent trail that reached her fingertips. 2 hours later, the room had changed. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, as though holding its breath. The police stood near the fireplace, their boots leaving damp marks on the rug. In the center of it all stood a man with a calm, measured gaze, Hercule Poirot. His posture was immaculate, his eyes sharp, observing every inch of the room. Detective Inspector Harris turned to him. No signs of a struggle, no wounds. She just dropped. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. "And the tea? It's been sent for analysis," Harris replied. "Her maid swears she used the same tin she always does." Poirot knelt beside the fallen cup. The porcelain had cracked cleanly, revealing the pattern inside, a ring of blue flowers circling the rim. He ran a gloved finger across the handle, pausing as he felt a faint irregularity, a ridge almost invisible. He straightened. "This was not an accident," he said softly. Harris frowned. "You think it was poisoned?" "I think," Poirot said, "that silence can kill more surely than any blade." Later, in the sitting room, Evelyn sat on the edge of a chair, pale and trembling. Poirot entered quietly, the creak of the door the only sound that made her look up. "Miss Drake," he began, "you were here when Lady Langford died?" She nodded, voice shaky. "Yes, it happened so suddenly. One sip, and she was gone." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "Tell me about the conversation before she drank her tea." Evelyn hesitated. She was distant. She said the house hadn't had laughter in years. She seemed almost haunted. "Haunted by what? I wonder," Poirot murmured. "I don't know," Evelyn replied. "But she mentioned her husband, Sir Robert. She said he never left the house." Poirot's brow lifted slightly. "Never left? In what sense?" Evelyn shook her head. She didn't explain. I thought it was grief talking. Poirot paced slowly, his gaze sweeping the room. Perhaps, or perhaps she meant something more literal. The coroner's report came that evening. No poison detected in the tea, no trace of drugs or chemicals. The cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. But Poirot was not satisfied. He returned to the drawing room after everyone had gone, the light of a single candle flickering across the carpet. He picked up the broken cup from where it had been set aside for evidence. Again his finger traced the rim, then paused at the same faint ridge he had felt before. Under the magnifier, it became clear, a thin layer of something shiny, invisible to the naked eye. A thin line, as though a clear resin had been brushed along one side. He turned to Harris, who had joined him reluctantly. "What do you make of this, Inspector?" Harris shrugged. "Glue, maybe? Crack repair." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not glue. Something far more deliberate." He touched the rim lightly with a small strip of litmus paper from his pocket. The paper shifted color almost instantly. Harris blinked. "What in the world?" Poirot's voice was low, calm. "It appears Our Lady Langford was not poisoned from within her cup, but from the cup itself." That night, Poirot dined alone at his hotel, staring thoughtfully at his own teacup. He rarely drank tea anymore. Too many times it had carried secrets. He replayed the scene in his mind. Two women, one maid, a simple pot of tea, and a silence that grew heavier with each word. He had seen that silence before, in rooms filled with guilt. Lady Margaret had said the house hadn't heard laughter in years. Why? What sorrow hung in its walls? Poirot leaned back, eyes narrowing. "A tea that kills without poison," he whispered to himself. "How curious." He smiled faintly. Tomorrow, the silence will speak. Chapter 2. The House That Heard Nothing. The next morning broke with a dim light that crawled reluctantly through the clouds. The manor stood still, its long windows reflecting nothing but gray. Hercule Poirot arrived precisely at 8. He disliked lingering shadows. They made people whisper too easily, and whispers were where lies began. Inside, the servants moved with the hollow quiet of guilt. No one spoke above a murmur. The kettle steamed on the stove, untouched. Poirot watched the mist curl upward like a ghost that refused to fade. Detective Harris stood by the window, reviewing his notes. "No trace of anything toxic," he muttered. "No needle marks, no residue on the pot. Whatever killed her left no mark." Poirot replied softly, "Everything leaves a mark, Inspector. The question is only where we choose to look." He turned toward the tea service that had been carefully reassembled for examination. The porcelain pot gleamed under the morning light, the broken cup now replaced by its twin. Poirot ran a hand along the edge of the saucer. "Tell me, who handled this set before it reached Lady Langford?" Harris flipped through the maid's statement. "Alice prepared the tea, poured it in front of both women. Miss Drake didn't touch the pot. Only Lady Langford did, and only her cup." Poirot nodded. "And the tea itself, from the same tin?" "Yes." Harris tested it himself. "Perfectly harmless." Poirot's eyes lingered on the cup. "You see, Inspector, the harm may not have come from what she drank, but from how she drank it." Harris frowned. "I don't follow." Poirot's gaze lifted. "We shall see. But first, I should like to speak to the maid." Alice came into the sitting room hesitantly, wringing her hands in her apron. She was young, pale, and afraid of her own voice. Poirot smiled kindly to ease her nerves. "You were devoted to your mistress, I think." "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "She wasn't cruel, just lonely." "Lonely?" Poirot echoed. Alice nodded. "Since the master died, the house hasn't been the same. She said the walls whispered at night. I thought it was just the wind." Poirot tilted his head. "Tell me, on the morning she died, did you notice anything unusual?" The maid thought hard. "Only that she asked for the blue cup. She never cared which one before. But that day she said, Bring me the blue one, Alice. I like the way it feels. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. The way it feels, you say? Yes, sir. Did anyone else ever use that cup? Alice hesitated. It belonged to Sir Robert. He used it every morning for years. After he died, Lady Margaret kept it locked away. She said it reminded her of him. Poirot's mind began to turn like a clock, finding its rhythm again. Locked away? In a cabinet, perhaps. In the study, Alice answered. Behind the glass case. Poirot thanked her gently and dismissed her. As she left, Harris said, What do you make of it? I make of it, Poirot said, that sentiment can be as deadly as hatred. They moved to the study. The air smelled faintly of old books and dust. Sunlight pushed its way through the curtains in narrow beams, catching dust motes that drifted like forgotten thoughts. Poirot stopped before a tall cabinet of glass, where porcelain cups sat in perfect order. One spot on the shelf was empty. Poirot touched the outline left in the dust. The missing blue cup. Harris leaned closer. So, it was her husband's? Yes, said Poirot, and perhaps that is why she chose it. A connection to him, even in death. Could have been tampered with long ago. Perhaps. But tampered with how? That we must discover. Poirot's next stop was the workshop at the back of the estate, a small room where Lady Margaret had kept her late husband's belongings. The space smelled faintly of polish and old paper. On the workbench sat a small box of maintenance tools, brushes, and something curious, a set of thin metal files used for repairing porcelain. Poirot picked one up delicately. She was mending something recently, he said. Harris examined the table. Looks like she tried to fix a crack in that cup. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, perhaps she sealed her own fate. He lifted a jar of clear varnish from a bench. Its label read, For ceramic preservation. Beneath it, a smaller bottle sat half empty, its lid corroded. He opened it, sniffed once, and immediately shut it again. The odor was sharp, metallic bitter. He looked at Harris. Do you smell it? The inspector nodded uneasily. What is that? Poirot replied softly. A compound meant to preserve pottery. But if heated, it releases a vapor that can stop the heart in moments. Harris stared. You think she inhaled it? Poirot shook his head. No, it requires moisture to activate. A single touch of boiling tea, and the reaction would begin. He set the bottle down gently. Our Lady Langford repaired her husband's cup, and used the same cup again, not knowing what she had made of it. Harris frowned. So, this wasn't murder? Poirot looked at him steadily. Does intention decide death, Inspector? She created the weapon with love, but it still killed her. That evening, Poirot sat in the drawing room again. The fire burned higher now, throwing long shadows across the walls. Evelyn Drake entered quietly, her face drawn. I heard you found something, she said. Poirot nodded. Your article may have a different ending than you planned, Miss Drake. She sank into a chair, eyes tired. It's strange. She was telling me about her husband just before it happened. She said she missed hearing his voice in the mornings, that the silence was unbearable. Poirot's expression darkened. Perhaps that silence sought to answer her. Evelyn stared into the flames. Do you believe in fate, Mr. Poirot? I believe, he said, in cause and consequence, in a world where even grief leaves fingerprints. Evelyn hesitated. Do you think she meant to die? No, Poirot said quietly, but perhaps she no longer feared it. They sat in silence for a while. The house creaked softly, as if exhaling at last. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, listening to the wind sweep past the windows. Then he spoke again, his tone gentle but certain. Every silence hides a sound, Miss Drake. We need only to listen carefully enough to hear it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Poirot remained alone in the study. He stood before the glass cabinet once more, gazing at the empty space where the blue cup had once rested. He imagined Lady Margaret's hands, delicate and shaking, applying the varnish to preserve her husband's memory, never knowing that the act of love would carry her to the same quiet end. He spoke softly into the dimness. There are many ways to die, but the most terrible is when one dies holding on to the past. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Poirot turned away, closing the cabinet door gently. As he did, the faintest echo followed him, the soft clink of porcelain, as if something unseen had stirred inside. He paused, listening. The house said nothing, and in that silence, Poirot understood the truth completely. The manor had heard nothing, because its walls were built to keep every cry inside. Chapter 3. The cup is empty. The storm had passed by dawn, but the manor remained cloaked in a heavy, breathless stillness, as if even the air hesitated to stir without Poirot's permission. The police had come and gone in the night, their boots leaving faint trails across the marble. But it was Poirot who stayed, silent in the drawing room, studying the tea set as though it still whispered secrets. The morning light cut through the tall windows, catching the polished edge of the teacups. 3 cups sat untouched. One was shattered. One, the cup of silence, remained upright, drained, and perfectly clean. Colonel Graves entered, his expression weary but curious. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Poirot did not look up. "Sleep, my friend, is the companion of peace. There is no peace here yet." Graves sighed and glanced toward the table. "You already proved the tea was poisoned. The killer will hang, I expect. What else could there be?" Poirot finally turned, his eyes calm, sharp as glass. "A motive. And the truth, Mon. Ah, the truth, my friend." He gestured toward the tea set. "You see, everyone in this house has handled these cups, but only one person handled them with care after the tea was poured." Graves frowned. "You mean the maid?" "No. The maid poured, yes. But someone else adjusted the spoons, made sure the hostess had a particular one." He leaned closer. "The poisoned spoon." The colonel blinked. "But all the spoons are identical." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not in weight. I noticed one fell differently when I set it down. A small imperfection beneath the handle, an air bubble in the metal. But this morning, that imperfection is gone." Graves stepped forward. "Gone? Yes, because our killer removed it in the night." Poirot motioned toward the fireplace. Inside, buried among cold ashes, something gleamed. The colonel bent and retrieved it with a cloth. It was the spoon, half melted, warped beyond recognition. Poirot nodded. "There lies the proof." Later, the guests gathered once more in the drawing room. Tension crackled like static in the air. Mrs. Harcourt, the widowed sister, sat nearest the fire, her face pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot stood near the table, with a single surviving cup gleamed like an accusation. "My friends," he began softly, "Mrs. Blythe's death was not an accident. She was murdered, and the weapon, such a simple thing, was not in the tea itself, but in the spoon used to stir it." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "The spoon's handle was hollow, sealed with wax," Poirot continued. "Inside it, an agent that vaporized when stirred in hot tea. A trick most clever. When the victim lifted the cup to her lips, the air above it carried the poison straight into her lungs." He turned slowly. "But who would know such a method? Who would have access to the compound, the patience to craft such a device?" He let the silence draw out, the weight of it pressing on every heart in the room. Then he fixed his gaze upon Mrs. Harcourt. "You, madam." She flinched as though struck. "That's absurd," she said quickly. "Why would I harm my own sister?" Poirot's voice was gentle. "Because she planned to disinherit you. I found her new will in her writing desk. It was unsigned, but prepared. Your sister intended to leave everything to her companion, Miss Lily." The room erupted in whispers. Miss Lily's eyes widened, trembling. I didn't know," she whispered. Mrs. Harcourt's composure cracked. She was going to ruin me. After all I did for her, after I nursed her through illness, managed her estate, she was going to give it all away to a stranger. Poirot's tone was calm, but final. So you killed her. A poison that could not be traced, in a cup no one would suspect. You waited for the tea to cool slightly, just enough to stir it safely, and then you placed the poisoned spoon before her. Mrs. Harcourt's voice rose, sharp and desperate. She never even noticed. She just kept talking as if I didn't exist. Until she fell silent, Poirot said softly, "And you called for help, pretending shock." She buried her face in her hands. The silence in the room deepened, heavy as grief. Outside, the morning wind rustled the curtains like the hush of a funeral prayer. Colonel Graves stepped forward grimly. "It's over, then?" Poirot shook his head. "No, my friend. It is ended, but not over. There is always the question that remains after every crime." Graves frowned. "And what's that?" Poirot looked down at the cup of silence. "How much peace is worth a life?" he said quietly. "For some, even love is not enough to silence envy. For others, silence itself becomes the weapon." He placed the cup back on the tray, turning it upside down. But justice, at least, should never be silent. Later that day, as the house emptied of police and guests, Poirot remained a moment longer. The fire burned low. He traced his finger along the smooth rim of the teacup. Thoughtful, he whispered to himself, "The smallest detail, always it speaks." And then he turned away, his reflection caught for a moment in the silver tray. Two eyes, steady and knowing, fading into the dimness of the dying day. In the end, it was not the tea that killed. It was the silence between two sisters, a silence that began long before the cup was poured and ended only when the last word was never spoken. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another case solved by Hercule Poirot. And remember, even the quietest cup may hold the loudest secret.